sustainability, we have a problem where we need to use less material to do what we need to do. So another way of saying that is we need to do more with less. So we need to design projects that do more for people and you consume less resources as we do that. When the projects are coming to be renewed or refurbished or at the end of their life, we need to be able to reuse that material because we know we need to be circular. We have a resource crisis that we don't have enough material. We have a planetary crisis that we need to use less material. So that material must be reused. We are used to having contracts where we specify what we want, and we're getting better at having contracts where we ask for what the service we want. So the classic example that people use to say that is, rather than saying, I want to light an airport, you say, I want you, and then we wind up having to replace the light bulbs and the light fittings and the energy that's consumed. You say to the private sector, I want you to light the airport, and you can do it in the way that you want to, using the least possible resources, and that gives the client the value. So they're getting the lighting they want, costing less for less resources, and the private sector gets rewarded. So that's where it gets, and then you need to write contracts that give you that opportunity to reward the private sector whilst giving the public sector what the public sector wants, using the least possible resources. And that's where you give everybody a share of the value.
We need to build these projects in a way that is future-proofed, that is looking towards the future of a standard that will bring in sustainable aviation fuels, et cetera. So it isn't simply good enough any longer to just build out the infrastructure and not think of the usage and its carbon intensity of that facility. So I think we're, we have a way of doing this. We need to push, frankly, be proactive with the industry, be proactive with the standard setters in that industry, and have a pathway that makes airports, amongst others, something that has something that can be much lower carbon in the future. Give the industry time, but push as well, because frankly, I don't think we can afford to simply sit back and do nothing. I mean, these are the types of assets that really need an extra effort on standards and pushing. And I think we can, if we do it collectively, we can get there. We need to follow through. There are very bright people working on these methodologies, and I think we'll get there. But we have to work with industry. We have to work with that pathway over the next 10 to 20 years to get there. But at the same time, emerging market, developing countries need to have improved infrastructure. Think about ports, airports, rail, road. We can't simply drop the ball on them. They need to have basic connectivity for their countries and for them to be able to participate in the global economy. So we need to do it in a way that is forward-looking, high standards, and I think we can get there if we keep concentrated on the goal.
Yeah. For us to get these projects right, we need to do it right at the very beginning. So project preparation for us at the initial stage is very critical, and this is where we are having challenges, where we see projects taking long in terms of implementation because they were not properly done. In some cases where we see projects not even proceeding, or where government has put in money and midway the projects are really stalled or they're abandoned. And for us, what is critical, project preparation is really important. I think what Matthew said, I think it's really important for us to tap on such opportunities to ensure that we have these projects that are viable, and we'll be able to flag them, whether we're supposed to finance them using the budget, or we are using the blended financing, or we are using debt, or we are using PPPs. What is critical for us is having viable projects, and that's a capacity that we really need as a country to ensure that we sell those projects.
So as someone who works for the private sector or the public sector, I'm interested in Matthew's point about having procurements that are ready for the private sector to invest in, that are prepared to be sustainable. Because if you do that in the correct way, you allow the project to be a collaboration project that builds local capacity and provide a measurement that allows the private sector to say, I'm investing in a project that is sustainable. that is now a more resilient asset to invest in, because you know it's been future-proofed. And go back to the very good point that Matthew said, we need to provide the solutions now, but they need to be ready for the change that we need to do in the future. And if you put that into the project preparation, now you give the private sector something to invest in that is an attractive asset to invest in, because it is inherently future-proofed. And it's also, if you build a local capacity for the private sector, that is future-proofing it as well. So if we can join all of that conceptual thinking up into the project delivery, so that you have something that you can give to the private sector that becomes enhancing to invest in, we get this, and then you do it again. That's where we get into a virtuous circle.
For us, as I mentioned earlier, project preparation is very cardinal for us to come up with the portfolio of ready investment-ready project pipelines, and that is based on having properly prepared projects that are able to be tapped in by the private sector, even ourselves as government, so that we reduce excess spending, which is not effective. And the other thing is the contract negotiations. I think it's really critical for us, especially when you're dealing with the private sector. They may have well-informed and well-experienced teams, and when it comes to the government side of the public entity, we might lack one or two experiences or expertise in when you're negotiating. So negotiation skills for us are very, very critical if we have to get value for money from the project and be able to get the service delivered to the people, as well as ensuring that the private sector also gets their return from the project.
You want something that is an output specification. So what I mean by that is you tell them how you would functionally like this asset, this thing that they want to do to actually work and deliver, and the benefits. That is, defining the output, the actual results of what you want. That's a good way of doing this. But this is something that, there's a lot of experience out there. That's why it is very helpful to have experts on your side, if you haven't done this yourself, to bring them in and help you through this the first few times. But then you set that in your standards, and then you go forth. And I think, it's about getting the help up front early, and then learning from it, and then doing it going forward, hopefully more and more on your own. Because, I've worked 24 years first in Latin America for 10 years and now 15 years with EBRD. And it's been a great pleasure, but I also really would like, by the time I'm done with my career, to have, more and more countries, sort of objectively be able to do more on their own. I mean, you have to get to a point where they're building up enough of their own abilities so that you kind of put yourself out of work. I mean, I would love that to be the case, that there's many, many more countries that really can chart their own destiny and do it themselves. So that's what I'm working at. Yeah. I mean, I think you mentioned renewables. No, indeed, that is an area where there has been more standardization of approaches. Think of solar and wind in particular. There's replication that is happening. We do advisory in that area, but frankly, there are enough similarities from country to country that you can standardize that approach, and there's so that helps a lot. And I think there it's about doing it a couple of times and then really make sure they adopt, as Irene said, standard bidding documents, standard offtake agreements, power purchase agreements, etc. So I think, it's critically important. And by the way, let me say, even though we have very, very high standards and they're critical and we will keep them, we have to make sure the countries are able to make huge investments in renewable. That energy transition in solar, for example, has to quadruple between now and 2030 globally. And right now, we're struggling because of supply chains. We're struggling because of all kinds of issues. We need to keep ourselves focused on doubling, tripling, quadrupling solar investment in the world. It's incredibly important, as we all know.
We spoke about we need much more renewables. We need the renewables faster. But also, we need to manage the demand from the other sectors for that renewable energy. So if you take transport sector, people like me have a responsibility to curtail the amount of travelling happening, and that travelling is the most efficient it can be. So we need to design our transport systems with our cities that there's less travel, and that less travel will reduce the pressure on the energy sector and give it more time to put in place renewable energy. We mentioned already the population growth. So we've enormous growth in our cities, and if we don't do that growth properly, our transport system winds up consuming too much energy and puts more pressure on the renewable energy sector to do its transition faster. So that's this really complicated piece of system interdependency. And that's where thinking about project preparation, not just at individual projects, but as the programs or projects we do about building our cities, building our transport system, building our energy system, and building our water system, that's what gets really interesting. And if we can bring the innovation from the private sector into that, that's the sweet spot. So it becomes quite conceptual, but the reward is huge.
You know, anything to do with buildings and the way urban development, regional development is organized. I mean, you have to think very hard about what it is that makes most sense, what fits with local customs, cultures, and so on. And I think it gets back to the way you prepare projects is very important. I didn't mention it, but I will right at the end. Deep stakeholder engagement, local planning, local understanding and inputs is incredibly important. And we're trying to do more and more of that, particularly in the way we plan our projects at the city levels with our city level. So, you know, deep stakeholder engagement brings some of that out, hopefully, and I hope we're doing a good job of that now.
Whether it's a water solution or a transport solution or an energy solution, if you don't design it for the people who are going to use it, it won't be used in its intended form. And it you need to come up with solutions that will be used by the whole of the population. So it is that standardized, but always customized for your local place. And that comes back to, if you're not including a local capacity of what you're doing, if you're not listening and you're not including, you're not really being sustainable. You can't describe the projects as being sustainable. They therefore aren't sustainable, and we're not doing what we said we were going to we intended to do.